This is the story of the Noel Bank Robbery, a case that tested the police officers' understanding and patience to the limit. The story begins at the Skin Bay Bridge near a lake in Oklahoma. It was around 3 a.m. This place was famous for fishing. But that night, something happened that no one had ever imagined. In Missouri, there is a small town named Noel. Only 1,200 people live there. Everyone knows each other. Life was simple and peaceful. But on the morning of 6 October 1989, something happened that shook the whole town. That morning, a woman named Pauline Crode reached the bank. She was a cashier at the State Bank of Noel. Her daily duty was to arrive early and unlock the bank's door. But as soon as she reached, she saw the door was already open. She thought maybe the bank president, Dan Short, came early. But there was no one inside. When she entered, everything was scattered, and within moments, she understood what had happened. The bank had been robbed. She immediately called 911. Soon, police and the sheriff arrived. Since the bank held people's money and it was under government guarantee, the FBI was also called. An FBI officer from the nearby city of Joplin arrived and began the investigation. When the police inspected the bank, they saw that the security camera was covered with black spray and damaged by a gunshot. They also found .45 caliber shell casings. This meant the thieves were armed and had planned everything carefully. It was discovered that the thieves had escaped with about $71,000, including heavy copper and silver coins. But the most shocking thing was that, in an open drawer, more than $100,000 in bills was lying untouched. This clearly showed that the robbery was not random. The thieves took only what they specifically wanted. Bank President Dan Short was one of the 4 people who had full authority to open the vaults and control its time lock. But on the same morning when the robbery was discovered, he was the only employee who did not come to work. Because of this, the police and the FBI now focused directly on him. The first question was, where is Dan Short? The bank's vice president, Mark Ullman, told investigators that Dan Short had stayed at the bank late the previous night. And the surprising thing was that he had not set the vault's time lock that night. According to Ullman, Dan often worked late at night, and that night he left the vault in standby mode. This meant he planned to return later and open it himself. Now the investigators began to wonder, did Dan Short really return? And was he himself involved in the robbery? The sheriff went to look for Dan at his home in Arkansas, near the Missouri border, but no one was there. His red pickup truck was also missing. Dan's sudden disappearance had now become a serious concern. On one side, the bank was robbed, and on the other side, its president had vanished. Clearly, suspicion was now turning toward him. Meanwhile, news of the robbery spread across the town. Noel was not a big city, just a small town with a few poultry plants, local shops, and old businesses. Some tourists came in summer, but the rest of the year the place stayed quiet and simple. No one expected such a crime here. As soon as the robbery and Dan's disappearance became public, local radio and TV channels started reporting it every hour. People themselves began calling the police, some offering help, some giving small pieces of information. One of these calls turned out to be extremely important. It came from a factory called Sibley Manufacturing. An employee said that a red pickup truck had been parked in the factory lot for several hours. When the police reached the parking area, the red pickup truck was confirmed to be registered under Dan Short's name. In the back of the truck, police found coin wrappers scattered around. This meant that money had been carried to or from there. Police lifted fingerprints from the truck, but they found only Dan's prints.
Up to now, 2 possibilities were forming. Either Dan had been kidnapped, or he himself was involved in the robbery and escaped with the money. The lead agent on the case was Liddell Farley, who had 19 years of experience in the FBI. He later said that by the end of the first day, it was extremely difficult to decide whether Dan Short was a victim or a suspect. So the police were working from every angle. His credit cards were being monitored. Airports were being checked. Car rental companies were contacted to see if Dan had rented a vehicle. But the main focus was still on the surrounding area, because investigators hoped that some clue about Dan might turn up nearby, whether he was alive or not. Since there was no trace of Dan, the investigators obtained a search warrant for his house. They hoped something inside might indicate where he could be. When the team reached his Arkansas home and knocked on the door, there was no response. The house was completely silent. When the police entered, they found a kitchen trash can knocked over, raising suspicion that there might have been a struggle. They searched the whole house. In the bedroom, on the nightstand near the bed, they found Dan's glasses. The police found this strange because Dan never left the house without his glasses. The condition of the room suggested that he might have left in a hurry or been forced out. But even now, it was still unclear whether he left willingly or was taken by force. When nothing helpful was found in Dan's home, investigators began talking to neighbors. During this time, a neighbor named Carol Dryden shared something important. She said that on the night of the robbery, she saw several vehicles coming and going outside Dan's house. This information was considered important by Assistant U.S. Attorney Mike Jones, who had been with the case from the beginning. According to him, this testimony helped investigators understand the time frame of events for the first time. Carol said she saw headlights around 2 a.m. Several vehicles entered Dan's driveway and left after 15 to 20 minutes. Now the police had a developing timeline, but it was still not clear where Dan Short went that night, or where he was taken. Sheriff Don Schleisman launched a massive search operation across Noel and nearby areas. A command post was set up on the west side of town. Several teams were formed and sent out in different directions. The highway patrol provided a helicopter to search the area from above. The teams began searching from the location where Dan's truck was found and slowly expanded outwards. 5 days passed, but there was still no sign of Dan. As the search continued, Agent Farley and 22 FBI agents from Kansas City formed a task force. Local police joined them. To manage such a large team, the FBI set up a temporary headquarters inside the town's local armory. From there, all teams worked together. Meanwhile, new leads kept coming in from local residents. One crucial lead came from a local truck driver named Buddy Mills. He said that on the morning of the robbery, around 3 a.m., he was returning from work. On the road, he saw 3 vehicles passing by. One of the vehicles looked exactly like Dan Short's red pickup truck. The truck was traveling with a 2-tone colored van. The third vehicle was a dark-colored truck that followed Buddy for some time and then turned toward Arkansas. Buddy Mills's statement matched neighbor Carol Dryden's account. Both had seen vehicle movement between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Their combined information now made it almost certain that Dan Short had been taken away that night. When no trace of Dan was found, Agent Farley decided to speak with Dan's ex-wife, Joyce. Joyce and Dan had been married for 25 years, although they had separated recently. When Farley met her, Joyce said that Dan was a good father. He loved their children very much and always worked responsibly. She had worked with him at the bank for many years and had never felt that Dan ever did anything wrong. But despite all this, in the eyes of the FBI, Dan Short was still the biggest suspect, because many days had passed since the robbery and he was still missing. Then, on the morning of 11 October, something happened that completely changed the direction of the case. 2 men had gone fishing on Oklahoma's Grand Lake. They were moving toward a quiet and shaded part of the lake, hoping they would find good fish there. But then they saw something strange floating in the water. At first, they thought it was a plant or some weed, but as they moved closer, their minds went numb. It was not a plant. It was a human body. Just below the surface of the water, the head and hands were visible. This was the same lake that had been completely silent a few days earlier. But now, the first body connected to the State Bank of Noel case was being pulled out of this water. A Marine unit was called immediately. They pulled the body to the shore and brought it to the dock. The body was in terrible condition. The flesh had completely decomposed. But when the post-mortem was done, the doctor said the person had been dead for about 5 days. The doctor explained that when a person dies in water, the bacteria inside the body start breaking down the soft tissues. This creates gases that slowly fill the body from the inside. After a few days, these gases make the body float upwards. And that is exactly what happened this time. When the police pulled the body out of the lake, the sight was horrifying and disturbing. Sheriff Don Schleisman later said that a heavy concrete block, an iron chain, and a part of a chair were tied to the body. It was clear that someone had purposely tied him to a chair before throwing him into the water, and then tried to sink him with heavy objects. The sheriff said that a body floats until the skin bursts and the gases escape. After that, it sinks again. If those fishermen had not been there that day, this body might never have been found. Later, when the medical team checked the body, the time of death matched exactly with the time when Dan Short went missing. When the sheriff checked the back pocket of the body's pants, he found a wallet. Inside it was a driving license, and that confirmed it for sure. The body belonged to none other than bank president Dan Short. The sheriff immediately informed the FBI. Now, this was no longer a missing person case. It had officially become a murder case. When investigators studied the chair and everything attached to it, it became even clearer that Dan Short had not just drowned. He had been murdered. Every clue pointed to the fact that when Dan was thrown off the bridge, he was still alive. The bridge was about 30 feet high. Throwing a person alive from such a height, tied to a chair with heavy weight, was a deliberate killing. As soon as the chair's photos and details were released, hundreds of calls started coming in on the hotline. With the help of these calls, police prepared a list of about 80 possible suspects. Now they had many names to look into. Among these calls, one anonymous call turned out to be extremely important. The caller said the police should look into 2 brothers, Joe Egofsky and his younger brother Shannon Egofsky. Another anonymous call had also been made to the Scheller Police Department, saying the Egofsky brothers had a lot of coins. And it was important to remember that a large amount of coins had been taken in the bank robbery. So this information connected directly. The FBI immediately traced Joe Egofsky, who was 23 years old and worked at a junkyard a few miles from Noel. The investigation team reached there and questioned the junkyard manager. He said Joe was working on his vehicle. The agents went to him and asked, "Are you Joe Egofsky?" He calmly answered, "Yes, sir." Joe said that on the night of the robbery, he was at his girlfriend's house, which was about 40 miles from Noel. Then the agents asked if he had any weapons. Joe told them without hesitation that he had 2 .45 caliber handguns. This was the same caliber used to shoot the bank's security camera. The agents asked if they could examine the guns. Joe agreed and said the guns were at his house, where his younger brother Shannon would be present. Shannon was only 18 years old. When the FBI agents reached the Egofsky brothers' home, Shannon was there. He showed the agents where the guns were kept and also told them that on the night Dan Short was killed, he was at his mother's house because he was living there at that time. The FBI seized both guns and performed firing tests on them. They collected shell casings from the test shots and sent them to the FBI lab to check if they matched the casings found at the bank. After some time, the report came back, and it clearly stated that these guns had not been used in the crime. This weakened the suspicion on Joe and Shannon. For Agent Farley, this turned out to be a dead end. However, both brothers fully cooperated in the investigation. They even said that if the police needed any help, they were ready. And the most important thing was that both had solid alibis for that night. They had proof of where they were. Seeing all this, the FBI and police felt that the Egofsky brothers probably had no direct connection to the case. The investigation now shifted back to the other suspects. During this time, in the same area where Dan Short's body had been found 2 days earlier, a new clue appeared. A man named Rowdy Foreman had gone fishing with his son and daughter along the Grand Lake shore. While walking along the bank, they saw a wooden stick lying there. It looked different from the surroundings. A little later, they also found a piece of duct tape. It was the same kind of tape that had been used to tie Dan Short to the chair. Rowdy Foreman and his children immediately remembered the photo of the chair that had appeared in the newspaper recently. The tape and stick looked similar to the items attached to that chair. They felt that this tape and wood might be part of the same chair used to tie Dan before he was thrown into the lake. To avoid making any mistake, Rowdy sent his son home to bring a plastic bag. When the bag arrived, he carefully packed the tape and wood so that the evidence would not get damaged. When Sheriff Don Schleisman heard the news, he and another officer went to Oklahoma to see the items themselves. They asked Rowdy, "Do you have any evidence?" Rowdy replied, "I can't be sure if it's evidence or not, but I did find a piece of duct tape." As soon as the sheriff looked at the tape, he was shocked. A clear fingerprint was visible on it. It looked like someone with a hand covered in car grease had touched it. The surprising thing was that the print had not faded even after being in the water. This tape had survived underwater. This discovery was extremely important. But even then, investigators needed solid proof to connect this tape to Dan's murder. The fingerprint would only matter if they could prove that the tape was part of the same chair used to tie Dan Short. To confirm this, the FBI decided to test the glue and fibers of the tape. They would compare it with the tape used on Dan's chair. But this was not easy. It was a very delicate lab process that could take many weeks. Until the report arrived, the FBI and local police did not have any solid suspect. After a full week since Dan Short's murder, the police only had his body, the chair used in the murder, and a fingerprinted piece of duct tape found near the lake. Nothing more. As the news of Dan Short's murder spread, the FBI kept receiving many calls. Some people truly wanted to help, but many were too scared to speak. The brutality of Dan's murder had created fear in people's hearts. Many witnesses spoke only after their friends or relatives convinced them to tell the truth. During this time, Agent Farley received a call. The caller said that his friend knew something about the chain hoist, the same heavy iron chain and pulley wrapped around Dan's chair and used to sink him. The man being mentioned was named Wayne Boat. Boat was the same person the agent's informer had talked about. Boat said that his chain hoist had been stolen some time ago, but that thing was never recovered. He suspected that the Igofsky brothers had stolen it. Agent Farley showed Boat the pictures of the chain hoist that was found from the lake. As soon as Boat looked at them, he recognized it. "Yes, this is mine," he said. He explained that there was a small, unique mark on the pulley from earlier, and the same mark was visible in the picture as well. Boat also said that he had last seen this equipment at Sheila Igofsky's house, and it had stayed there for some time. Now this was a big connection. Sheila Igofsky, the same house where Joe and Shannon Igofsky lived. Boat said that his chain hoist had been stolen some time ago. He had filed a theft report with the police, but that thing was never recovered. He suspected that the Igofsky brothers had stolen it. Agent Farley showed Boat the pictures of the chain hoist that was found from the lake. As soon as Boat looked at them, he recognized it. "Yes, this is mine," he said. He explained that there was a small, unique mark on the pulley from earlier, and the same mark was visible in the picture as well. Boat also said that he had last seen this equipment at Sheila Igofsky's house, and it had stayed there for some time. Now this was a big connection. Sheila Igofsky, the same house where Joe and Shannon Igofsky lived. Boat fully cooperated with the police investigation. He even said he was ready to take a polygraph test, and when the test was done, he passed. Now it was clear that the chain hoist found from the lake belonged to Wayne Boat, and a few days before Dan Short's murder, it had been present at Sheila Igofsky's house. When Wayne Boat clearly stated that the chain hoist found in the lake was his, and that it had been stolen from Sheila Igofsky's house, Agent Farley decided that he needed to question the Igofsky family again. When Agent Farley reached their mother Sheila's house, he saw an old van parked in the front yard, And this was the same van that Buddy Mills had seen driving on the road on the night the bank was robbed. Agent Farley asked Sheila if she remembered anything about the missing chain hoist, but she said she didn't remember anything. She repeated the same thing again, that Shannon was at her house that night, the same alibi she had given earlier. She clearly said, "I don't know anything about this. I cannot help you." Agent Farley felt that Sheila might not be telling the complete truth, but he had no solid evidence at that moment, so he returned empty-handed. Now, Farley decided to take fingerprints of both Joe and Shannon so they could be compared with the prints found on the duct tape. Joe Agofsky agreed without hesitation. When Agent Farley asked him about the chain hoist, Joe said he had seen it at his mother's house, but he didn't know what happened to it afterward. A few days later, Agent Farley went back to Sheila's house. There he saw that the younger brother, Shannon Agofsky, was with his friend, Gant Sanders. Since Joe had already given his fingerprints, Agent Farley asked Shannon to do the same. "Give your fingerprints too," he told him. "It will make the investigation easier and might save you from a big problem." But Shannon's behavior was completely different. Where Joe cooperated, Shannon kept avoiding it. He repeated the same thing his mother had said again and again. He didn't know anything about the chain hoist. Even in the presence of his friend Gant Sanders, Shannon didn't say anything new. Finally, he told Agent Farley, "Okay, I will come to the police station and give my fingerprints." But he never came. At first, Agent Farley had thought that the Agofsky brothers might not be involved in this crime. That's why he had removed their names from the suspect list. But as the differences in their statements increased, especially the differences between Joe and Shannon's statements, Agent Farley's suspicion grew deeper. Now he decided that he needed to look into the family's background more carefully. After checking the records, it was found that about 9 years earlier, their father had died in a plane crash, and after that, the family received a large insurance payout. From the outside, it looked like they were financially stable and did not need to rob a bank. But the truth was something else. Agent Farley discovered that most of the insurance money was already gone. Joe Agofsky had already spent his share, and their mother Sheila had also spent most of hers. Only Shannon had some money left, but it was in a closed fund that he could not touch until he turned 21. During the investigation, it also came forward that recently both brothers had bought new vehicles with cash, even though neither of them had a stable job. Most importantly, only a few days after the bank robbery, 18-year-old Shannon had spent more than $5,000 all by himself. Although these things created suspicion, Agent Farley still didn't have any direct evidence connecting the brothers to the bank robbery or the murder. He began reviewing the old witnesses' statements again, and that's when the story took a new turn. He remembered that truck driver Buddy Mills had said that on the night of the robbery, he had seen 3 vehicles leaving Noel. This meant that besides the 2 brothers, there was a third person involved that night. Immediately, a face flashed in Agent Farley's mind. The boy sitting on the porch the first time he went to Shannon's house. His name was Gant Sanders. He had recently started living with Shannon. Agent Farley tracked Gant and found him at a junkyard. The investigation revealed that Gant Sanders was a close friend of both Joe and Shannon. Their friendship continued before and after the robbery. When Agent Farley questioned him, Gant said he knew nothing about the robbery or the murder. But when he was asked where he was on that night, he had no solid answer and no witness to support him. Now Agent Farley thought he should question Shannon again, but this time with a lie detector test. This machine is called a polygraph. Its job is to detect whether a person is telling the truth or lying based on the movements of his body. The machine monitors 3 things. First, breathing patterns. 2 pipe-like sensors are placed on the chest. Second, sweat levels. Small electrodes are attached to the fingers. And third, blood pressure. A band is tied to the arm, like doctors use while checking BP. The test took place in a motel room, and an expert from Springfield City had come for it. He told Shannon that the test would not cause any pain, only record his body movements. When a person gets nervous or lies, his body reacts. His heart beats faster, breathing becomes rapid, blood pressure rises. The test is designed to track exactly these reactions. Shannon was asked questions about the bank robbery, Dan Short's murder, and the theft. He was asked whether he had stolen the chain machine or killed Dan Short. He said no every time. But the machine showed something very different. His body's reactions suggested he was lying. The report clearly stated that Shannon's answers were not truthful. This meant he had information about the crime. But even this was not enough to prove anything legally. In December 1989, the Agofsky family received a notice from the court. They had to appear in front of a grand jury and give truthful testimony. Shannon, his brother Joe, and their mother Sheila were all questioned separately. All of them said they had nothing to do with the bank robbery or Dan Short's murder. After the questioning, Shannon was again asked to give his fingerprints so they could be compared with the old evidence. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., an FBI team was examining the items found near the lake, a piece of wood and tape that Agent Farley's team had found. They were trying to confirm whether these items were from the same objects used to tie Dan Short. After testing, the experts clearly said that the wooden piece was from the same chair that Dan Short had been tied to. The most important thing was the tape with the fingerprints. The tests showed that the fibers and glue of the tape were exactly like the tape found on Dan Short's chair. Both pieces had come from the same roll. There were 2 clear fingerprints on the tape. When they were matched with Joe Agofsky's fingerprints, they did not match completely. But it was found that there were several similarities. Farley was told that sometimes siblings can have patterns in their fingerprints that look somewhat similar, so now it became necessary to collect Shannon's fingerprints too. Although Shannon had earlier said he would give them, he later refused. So Farley took the legal route and got a court-issued summons, forcing Shannon to cooperate. Finally, after 5 months, Shannon gave his fingerprints to the FBI. Shannon did give his fingerprints, but matching them with the tape would take a few weeks. Until the report arrived, he was released. But Agent Farley did not stop. He felt that Gant Sanders, the close friend of both brothers, knew more than he was admitting. Agent Farley decided to talk to Gant directly. He clearly told him that if he was innocent and knew anything, he should help the police. Otherwise, if the brothers had committed the crime and he helped them, then he could also face charges. Gant still had nothing to prove where he had been on the night of the robbery or the murder. So suspicions still remained on him. But even then, Gant did not say anything. He did not break his loyalty toward Shannon and Joe. Agent Farley began to feel that either Gant was trying to save himself from getting trapped, or he was truly hiding something big. Now, Agent Farley was completely sure that Shannon and Joe were behind this case. Joe's fingerprints had already been compared with the prints found on the tape, but they did not match. Meanwhile, some lighter fingerprints were also found on the tape. For investigation, they needed new fingerprints of Shannon taken from every possible angle. But this time, when the agents looked for Shannon, he had disappeared. Agent Farley believed he could reach Shannon through his friends, and Gant Sanders had become the most important link. Now, Farley started suspecting that the third man seen on the night of the robbery might actually have been Gant Sanders. But if Gant helped the FBI, he would have to speak against his own friends. Finally, in June 1990, Gant Sanders contacted Agent Farley himself. He said he wanted to talk, maybe hoping he could prove himself innocent. The investigation team directly told Gant Sanders that they believed he helped Shannon and Joe Agofsky in committing the bank robbery and the murder of bank president Dan Short. But Sanders denied this. However, he admitted being involved in another theft that had happened just a few months earlier. One night in December 1989, Shannon and Joe had stolen several rifles from a house in Missouri. Later that same night, they met Gant Sanders. This was the next part of their plan. The next day, Sanders and Shannon went to Arkansas, crossing the state line, and sold the stolen rifles there. This was a federal crime because they had crossed state borders to sell illegal weapons. Sanders further said that sometime later, the brothers tried to drag him into another job. But this time, it was far more dangerous. This happened a few months after Dan Schott's murder. According to Sheriff Don Schlesman, Shannon and Joe told Gant Sanders that now they wouldn't do small crimes anymore. This time, the target would have security guards, and there could be gunfire. They clearly told him, "If you are not ready to harm someone, then don't come with us." Sanders refused. He said he did not want to be part of such a crime. The brothers then dropped him back home. After fully cooperating with the FBI, Sanders accepted that he did take part in selling the stolen rifles. After this confession, he was released on probation as part of an agreement. He was also removed from the list of the third suspect in the bank robbery. Sanders passed 3 polygraph tests, which proved that he was not involved in Dan Schott's murder. Based on his help and statements, Agent Farley issued an arrest warrant against Shannon Egofsky. Now, Shannon was accused of selling stolen rifles across the state border, which was a serious crime. Joe Egofsky was not part of this sale, so no case was filed against him. A few months later, the police finally caught Shannon. He was found in a small town in Arkansas. When the police searched his car, they found several bags in the trunk, and they were filled with coins. This immediately caught the agent's attention because a large amount of coins had been stolen in the bank robbery. Shannon was arrested and handed over to Missouri officials. Then he was presented in the federal court in Springfield. During this entire process, Agent Farley finally got something extremely important: the full set of Shannon's fingerprints. The FBI lab had been waiting for this. The fingerprints found earlier on the tape were incomplete. They needed a full set from every angle. This was the same tape used to tie Dan Schott, the same tape that carried the partial fingerprints. Until now, Joe Egofsky was still free. Farley always had doubts, but there was no direct evidence against him. But investigators knew that the two brothers were still in contact. Shannon made several phone calls from jail to his mother and Joe. According to Assistant U.S. Attorney Mike Jones, one particular call became very important for the investigation. In that call, Shannon asked Joe, "Do you think the FBI will be able to build a case against me? Do you think the FBI will be able to build a case against me?" Joe replied that they had no evidence that could directly connect him to the crime scene. Agent Farley sensed that both brothers were worried. But that call still was not enough to prosecute Joe. A few days later, Farley finally received the report he had been waiting for. The FBI lab confirmed that the fingerprints on the tape belonged to Shannon. This also proved that the tape had come from the chair used to tie Dan Schott. Now this tape became the strongest evidence in the whole case. Government Attorney Mike Jones now began preparing the prosecution against Shannon. From the moment the first fingerprint was found, the case had been moving forward. Now the focus of the investigation shifted to Joe, but there was still no direct evidence linking him to the crime. Agent Farley investigated Joe's financial transactions. The report showed that in the 16 months after the robbery, Joe had spent nearly $1,000 in cash, even though he was unemployed and had no proper source of income. Phone records revealed something else too. Just before and right after the robbery, Joe had made several long calls to his girlfriend's house. This made it seem like he was not telling the truth, because earlier he had claimed he was with his girlfriend the entire time. The agents called Gant Sanders again to gather more information about Joe's role. Sanders said that once, at Sammy Skaggs's junkyard, the three of them were working on a car. Suddenly, Sammy said that a banker from Joplin had come to collect his car. According to Sanders, Joe then said they should follow that banker, catch him, bring him to the bank, and force him to open the vault. At that time, Sanders thought it sounded like an easy way to make money. But later, he didn't join them. Whatever happened to Dan Schott afterward reminded him of that moment. By now, All the evidence convinced the FBI that the brothers had the means, the motive, and the opportunity to commit the crime. Slowly, all clues began pointing toward Joe Agofsky, and about 2 years later, he too was arrested. Both brothers were charged with federal crimes: bank robbery, kidnapping, and illegal use of weapons. The question now was, would this evidence be enough to prove them guilty? After nearly 3 years of investigation, Agent Farley handed over all files and evidence to the prosecutors. The team reviewed their records and explained the entire plan and every step of the brothers to attorney Mike Jones. The aim was to prove, without any doubt, that they had committed the crime. The investigation also revealed that a few weeks before the crime, Joe had opened a safe deposit box in order to get the layout of the bank floor. Bank Vice President Mark Allman said that Joe was especially interested in Bank President Dan Schott. He even asked who Dan was and where he lived. After returning home, Joe drew the map of the bank floor and made a complete robbery plan with Shannon. They decided that the robbery would take place before sunrise so that no one would be around. They planned to enter through the front door, shut down the security cameras, and reach the vault. But to unlock the vault, they needed someone who had the keys and the combination. That's why they planned to kidnap Bank President Dan Schott and force him to open the vault. The final part of the plan was the most dangerous. They wanted to make sure Dan Schott could never talk. They believed it would be easy money, and if the plan worked, their lives would completely change. On the morning of October 6th, Joe and Shannon carried out their plan. A third man was with them, whose identity was never confirmed. He arrived in a blue Chevy pickup, the same truck neighbor Carol Dryden had seen near Dan's house. The brothers loaded necessary items into their mother's brown van and left for Dan Schott's house at around 2 a.m. The house was near the Arkansas border. Slowly, Dan woke up and tried to run, but he couldn't do anything. The brothers grabbed him and forced him into the front seat of the van. Then, all 3 vehicles, including Dan's red pickup, drove toward the bank. Agent Farley and the other investigators later connected all these events to uncover the truth. Soon, they reached the bank. They opened the door and went inside. The alarm didn't ring because the vault's time lock wasn't set that night. There was no one there, and no one saw what was about to happen. They removed the tape from Dan's mouth, took him near his desk, and took the vault keys from him. Then they forced him to give the vault combination. As soon as the vault opened, they went inside and took all the money they could find. Dan, terrified, obeyed every command. But while they were leaving, one of the attackers hit him on the head with the butt of a pistol, and he became unconscious. Around the same time, a truck driver named Buddy Mills was passing by. Coincidentally, he saw the 3 vehicles speeding across the road. Just moments after crossing the intersection, the vehicles sped away, 2 of them toward Grand Lake. About 22 miles from Noel, near Grand Lake, they stopped on the high part of the Wyandotte Bridge. There, Shannon and the unknown partner prepared to kill Dan Schott. In the rush, Shannon removed his gloves to tie the tape, leaving his fingerprints behind. The same prints that later became the most crucial evidence. Once everything was ready, they lifted Dan Schott and threw him into the deep, dark water, from where he never returned. In September 1992, when the first trial began, the evidence was so strong that the jury found both Shannon and Joe guilty of bank robbery, kidnapping, and illegal use of weapons. However, the murder charge was proven only against Shannon. But Joe's role in the entire plan was also clear. The third person was never identified, and he remains unknown even today. The verdict made one thing certain: the Agofsky brothers were the main planners and the most responsible people behind the entire crime. Their sister Sheila was not charged with anything. FBI agent Liddell Farley said that this case was the most difficult and terrifying of his entire 29-year career. He had seen many cases, but one with such brutality, planning, and cold-blooded violence was unlike anything else. Today, Joe and Shannon Agofsky are serving life sentences, and will never be released on parole. Meanwhile, Gant Sanders, for helping the FBI, was allowed to finish his sentence for the weapons crime on probation. Noel has returned to its old, quiet life again. But the crimes of these two brothers have left a dark and permanent scar on the town's history. This small town will never be as innocent as it once used to be.